Bill has a very, very significant story to tell, don't you? How old were you when you had your accident?
41.
You were young, very athletic, have 3 children, and you were riding an ATV near what, St. Anthony, Idaho?
Correct.
And it flipped.
Yes.
Oh, and it was on top of you. And then what happened?
I was unconscious. When my brother was with me, he came back and actually found me unconscious with the vehicle on top of me.
Yeah.
He was unable to get it off of me. I knew that I was very severely injured because I couldn't move anything.
Yeah.
And so I asked him to immobilize me as best he could so that I didn't inadvertently move. And he went to obtain help. He ran into a group of people, I think a couple of miles away from where we were. Eventually, they came back, helped remove the vehicle, and a helicopter was summoned to fly me to the Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center.
From where you left to come to the University of Utah.
Right. Well, the extent of my injuries were of such a nature I needed to be in a Trauma 1 center.
Yeah.
And the 2 options were either to go to Boise or to the University of Utah.
Yeah.
And the fact that I lived in Salt Lake, I mean, the University of Utah was...
Sure, was the thing to do. You are a paraplegic as a result of your accident.
That's correct.
And you have had, what, 2 near-death experiences, right?
Right. Well, they were... the experiences were during a period that I was in a coma. I went into a coma probably within a couple hours of being transported to the hospital in Idaho, and then was subsequently flown by air ambulance down to the University of Utah. I really don't remember anything past Idaho.
Yeah.
But when I was brought down to the University of Utah, the prognosis was not good. They weren't sure that I was going to survive my injuries. My brother came down on the air ambulance with me. My mother at that time was living in California, and my younger brother was in Puerto Rico in the military. And so my brother was kind of really didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so he called my cousin and his brother-in-law to come up to the hospital to give me a blessing because of the prognosis.
Yeah. You're not LDS.
No, I'm not.
They were, of course.
They were.
Gave you the blessing. And then what happened after you had the blessing?
Well, during the course of the blessing, I was in a coma, and I could feel their hands on me. I could hear what was being said, but at the same time, people were gathering around me and placing their hands on me. Some of these people I knew, they were deceased loved ones, like grandparents, aunts, uncles. Some I didn't know, but yet they were still familiar to me.
And they were all around you.
Right, as the blessing was being given to me.
Yeah.
I could feel their hands being placed on my body at the same time. But the thing that was really confusing, I was seeing this from an elevated position.
Yeah.
And at first, I really didn't know what was going on. Then I recognized that the body that I was seeing below me was actually mine. And I just had a tremendous sense of that everything was going to be okay at that moment, that, you know, these people had gathered there to be with me.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know where it was going to go from there.
Well, were you in a coma at that time?
I was in a very deep coma.
Well, so could this have been a hallucination?
You know, I've asked a number of doctors about that because that was a question I had. And the thing that separates out a near-death experiences is that it remains crystal clear It's something that doesn't change with time. A hallucination, they told me, is very disjointed. A dream is something that will fade very quickly. It's hard to recall all the elements of the dream.
Yeah.
Where with the near-death experience, I mean, it remains as clear to me today as it did almost 30 years ago.
Amazing.
Because of the experience that I had, I mean, in many ways, it left me with more questions than answers. I mean, you know, of course, I or anybody else that had a near-death experience, we didn't make the full, complete journey. We had a glimpse of something.
Yeah.
And that glimpse is something that compels us to, you know, seek more answers and to, you know, hopefully provide some comfort to people that may have the question as to what happens after death.
Yeah, yeah. Are you, do you consider yourself a religious person?
I consider myself very spiritual. I have a very deep-founded belief in God, but it isn't specific to any one religion.
Yeah,
in other words, I believe that you can connect with God wherever you're at, that, you know, really everything that we have is as a result of God's creations, if you will.
Okay, you have described the early part of your health issues, critical, it's super critical, and it got kind of worse in a way. They were afraid you were going to have internal bleeding that would stop you.
Well, when I was up in Idaho, I mean, originally, because of the amount of blood that they were seeing on a CT scan, they thought I had a torn aorta.
Yeah.
There were really a number of internal injuries. I had, all of my ribs were fractured. I had a hemothorax, a pneumothorax. There was traumatic pancreatitis. That was really the main reason why I needed to go to a trauma center.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I had a conversation up there. I knew I was paralyzed. I mean, that was very evident. And at that particular moment, they were asking me for permission to, they said, you know, in all likelihood, we're going to have to do open heart surgery, and we need your permission. And I said, well, if you don't do surgery, what's going to happen? They said, well, you're likely going to die because we can't control the bleeding.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I mean, it was nothing heroic. The thought of living paralyzed was more frightening to me than dying, and so I declined their request for permission to operate.
But you didn't die.
No. The decision was made after I lapsed into a coma to transfer me to the University of Utah. And once I arrived at the University of Utah, my medical condition continued to worsen. I developed a secondary condition called ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, which was actually, to my understanding today, is probably not much better than it was at my time, which was pretty much a 90% mortality rate.
Yeah. Okay, so you were saved, but you also, during that period, while you were at the University Hospital here, you did have a second near-death experience.
Right.
Tell me about that.
I believe, I mean, time-wise, I'm thinking this was really more towards the end of the period I was in a coma, because during the weeks, I was in a coma for several weeks, and they told my family multiple times I probably wasn't going to survive. Towards the end of that, they said, based upon the medical condition that I had, what they had experienced over those weeks, there was a very high likelihood that I wouldn't survive, and if I did, I may be in a vegetative state. They said, you know, in all likelihood, I may be institutionalized for the remainder of my life, requiring round-the-clock care. So conversations were going on at that time with my family about removing me from life support.
Yeah.
And So I believe it was really more towards the end period in this coma that the second event happened. In this event, I found myself in just an incredibly beautiful meadow, just flowers and foliage that were just colors beyond belief. And I was on a pathway walking down. There was a stone archway that I could see down at the bottom of this pathway, where there was this light that was emanating from it that was drawing me to it. And the thing that I found interesting was that everything was interconnected, that the plants, the flowers were communicating with me and I was communicating back. We were all at the same plane. I mean, nothing was at a higher level, nothing was at a lower level. Everything just seemed to be communicating and connected.
Yeah.
And so as I went down this pathway, I entered through this stone archway, and it was just a beautiful garden in there. And as I entered into there, my dad was ahead of me.
Hmm.
And my dad had actually passed away 6 years before I had my accident.
Yeah.
And
he hugged you?
He did.
And you felt him?
I did. You know, he looked wonderful to me. He looked, you know, just at the prime of his life. He looked very happy. He came up, he embraced me, and I had communicated to him, I said I was really lost and confused. I mean, I knew that I either had died or I was in the process of dying.
Yeah.
And when I told him that I was really confused, it was really more about, you know, what was going to happen with me, because I didn't want to deal with what I knew was ahead of me.
Yeah.
And my dad embraced me, and he just said, you know, you're not going to be lost or confused any longer, but you need to go back. It's not your time. When it is, I'll be here for you.
You, in a way, were connected to both realms, is that right?
Oh, I was, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that's kind of amazing about that is that actually continued after I regained consciousness.
What continued?
That being in both realms. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I'm one of the few people that actually had other people present that could validate my experience. My cousin, I was able to share with him what was taking place during the blessing. And after I came out of my coma, I mean, I had people that I hadn't seen for a long time, people that I didn't even know that were coming up to the ICU. They actually had to set visitation schedules for them and limit the number of people, but they were coming in because of the presence that was being emanated by me.
The aura.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you had a whole new aura, even though you were...
Oh, I did. My children were probably the most affected, in the sense that they said, you look like our dad, you sound like our dad, but you're not our dad. I mean, not in a negative sense. I mean, I had gone from a person that, I mean, I loved my children, but my connection, how I showed my love to them was by giving them things.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily giving them of myself.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're dealing with this person that really wanted to be connected with them and to express their love openly and share it with them.
It changed your life, this experience.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and that's the other element of a near-death experience that makes it really very different from anything else, is that they are life-changing events.
Yeah. And I have heard you say that you would prefer, if you had to choose, as between the NDE and the loss of your legs, which you've lost, the use of them, you would choose the NDE.
Oh, I would. The thing is that I believe that the near-death experience truly made me a much better person.
Yeah, yeah.
And that the gifts that I had really outweigh the losses.
Are you a good father now? A better father?
Oh, I am. I definitely. I have a very close connection with my children. The people that are in my life are important to me, and I communicate that to them. And through my connection with IANDS, I've had the ability to, be there and available to a lot of people that are going through some very difficult times.
That's interesting, because that, Martin, is really the purpose of your organization.
It is. People who have had near-death experiences have something profound to share, because everyone has lost someone or will lose someone, and everyone will die. And having some knowledge of that process and that there is something on the other side is very comforting. And the idea that most everyone comes back with from a near-death experience, that the most important things in life are love and learning, love and knowledge. So those are the things that people who experience it come back and say. That causes people to reevaluate their priorities and makes them better people. We've had experiencers who were atheists who became believers in God, who were frankly pretty bad people who became good people, and so on.
Do you have to, did you always believe in God, Bill?
I had a strong religious background as a child. I mean, my mother was Methodist, my dad was Catholic, so I had experience there. But the one thing that I think I struggled with, and I believe most of us do, is faith. Because faith is really subjective. It's not something that you can go out and put your hands on. I mean, you can't, when you're low on it, go buy, more faith. It's something that I struggled with. But when I had this experience, it's something that became really very firmly cemented within me.
Does the fact that you had both of your NDEs, your near-death experiences, while you were in comas, does that negate in any way the reality of your experience, your NDE?
Oh, no, not at all. I knew that I had had a very profound experience. I knew the experience that I had was very real. When I went to Martin, when they had their very first IANDS meeting here, it wasn't to seek validation.
Uh-huh.
It was really to see if there were other people that had had a similar experience.
And to share yours.
Not so much to share my experience, but to know that other people had these experiences. I think you'll find that most people that have had a near-death experience, there's not an agenda behind it. And in other words, it's not something that you're trying to convince other people that you had.
Yeah.
When the time is right, you share it with other people.
Yeah. We greatly appreciate your sharing yours with us. I think it's really significant.